It is the middle of the night on March 3rd, 2022, in the wealthy, quiet mountain community of Kamas, Utah. Inside a sprawling, gorgeous custom home, the ambient temperature is comfortable, but the atmosphere is completely frozen. At approximately 3:20 a.m., a frantic 911 call disrupts the peaceful silence of the Summit County Emergency Dispatch Center. The woman on the line is 32-year-old Kouri Richins, a successful local real estate investor and mother of 3 young boys. Her voice is shaking, filled with panic, as she tells the dispatcher that she just woke up to find her 39-year-old husband, Eric Richins, completely cold and unresponsive in their bed. When emergency medical technicians and sheriff's deputies sprint across the threshold of the master bedroom minutes later, they find Kouri frantically performing CPR on her husband. But the moment the paramedics take over, they realize it is already too late. Eric is pronounced dead at the scene. To the first responders on that cold March morning, it looks like an absolute, unimaginable tragedy. Eric was a healthy, robust 39-year-old man, a dedicated father, a passionate outdoorsman, and a highly successful co-owner of a thriving stone masonry business. He had no history of chronic illness or substance abuse. Kouri explains to the initial investigators that the couple had been celebrating a massive milestone earlier that evening. She had just successfully closed a multi-million-dollar real estate deal for her house-flipping business. To celebrate, she says she brought Eric a homemade Moscow Mule cocktail in bed, a drink he loved, served in a traditional, chilled copper mug. She claims she then went to sleep in one of her children's bedrooms to comfort their son, who was having a nightmare, only to return hours later to find her husband's lifeless body. The initial shock wave leaves the community entirely numb. A young mother left behind to raise 3 small boys, grieving a husband taken in the absolute prime of his life. But as the toxicology report makes its way back from the state forensic laboratory weeks later, the narrative of a spontaneous medical tragedy is completely obliterated. The post-mortem chemical analysis reveals that Eric Richins did not die of natural causes or a sudden cardiac event. His blood contains a lethal, staggering concentration of illicit fentanyl. It isn't just a trace amount. The medical examiner notes that the concentration is 5 times the maximum therapeutic limit, and it was entirely ingested orally. Eric had swallowed a chemical bomb. The Summit County Homicide Squad is quietly deployed. Investigators look at the copper mugs, the pristine kitchen counters, and the grieving widow, and they begin to realize that the celebration on the night of March 3rd wasn't an act of love. It was the final, lethal execution of a complex, calculated financial plot. And as detectives begin interviewing Eric's immediate family and business partners, they uncover a terrifying detail that turns the entire case into a psychological thriller. Eric hadn't just been poisoned that night. He had been living in absolute, mortal terror of his wife for months, leaving behind a digital and verbal paper trail that pointed directly to Kouri as his potential executioner. When a spouse dies of an oral drug overdose with no history of addiction, the first step for investigators is to trace the supply chain. How does a wealthy, suburban real estate investor in Utah acquire pure, lethal-grade, illicit fentanyl? Detectives executed a sweeping search warrant on Kouri Richins' personal electronic devices, utilizing advanced forensic software to recover deleted communications, location data, and internet searches. What they found was a digital blueprint for murder. The extraction report revealed that in the months leading up to Eric's death, Kouri had been in frequent, frantic contact with a private acquaintance known in court documents as CL. Kouri had text logs asking for some of that Michael Jackson stuff, specifically requesting strong, prescription-grade pain medication to treat a supposed back injury. CL would later testify under oath that they personally sourced and delivered dozens of illicit fentanyl pills directly to Kouri, handing them over in exchange for thousands of dollars in cash at various secluded parking lots around the county. The timeline built by the state was devastating. The digital data showed that Kouri received a shipment of pills just days before a very specific incident in February 2022. On Valentine's Day, less than 3 weeks before his death, Eric and Kouri sat down for a romantic dinner at home. Immediately after taking a few bites of his meal, Eric became violently ill, breaking out in hives, vomiting, and struggling to breathe. He had to use his son's emergency EpiPen to save his own life, later calling his sister in a panic to say, "I think my wife just tried to poison me." But why? What could possibly drive a mother of 3 to systematically poison the father of her children? The answer lay in the deep, catastrophic ruins of Kouri's secret financial life. To the public, she was a high-flying real estate mogul. But behind the scenes, her house-flipping business was millions of dollars in debt. She had taken out massive, unauthorized hard money loans, forged Eric's signature on financial documents, and was facing imminent exposure and total bankruptcy. Eric's estate, however, was anchored by a massive life insurance policy and a highly valuable stone masonry business worth millions. If Eric divorced her, a move he was secretly planning with a family lawyer, Kouri would be left completely destitute. If he died while they were still legally married, she would walk away with an absolute fortune. But the most bizarre, psychologically disturbing chapter of this case was yet to come. In the year following Eric's death, while she was still walking free under the radar of the active investigation, Kouri did something that completely stunned the nation. She wrote and self-published a children's picture book about overcoming grief. She went on local television networks, smiling warmly for the cameras, promoting her book titled "Are You With Me?", claiming she wrote it specifically to help her 3 young sons cope with the heartbreaking, sudden loss of their father. She stood before the public as a symbol of maternal resilience, a grieving widow helping children heal, while secretly knowing that the very grief she was capitalizing on was a direct result of the poison she had mixed into that copper mug. The state of Utah officially arrested Kouri Richins in May 2023, charging her with aggravated murder and multiple counts of possession of a controlled substance with intent to distribute. The arrest triggered a massive, high-stakes legal battle that culminated in a historic trial in early 2026. The Summit County courtroom became a battleground of raw emotion and clinical forensic data, drawing international media attention. The prosecution's case was an absolute masterclass in circumstantial and direct corroboration. They called Eric's sisters and his business partner to the stand. They delivered devastating, emotional testimonies, painting a picture of an incredibly loving father who had stayed in the toxic marriage solely to protect his 3 young boys. They revealed that Eric was so suspicious of his wife's financial manipulations that he had secretly altered his will and his life insurance policy months before his death, entirely removing Kouri as a beneficiary and transferring his entire estate into a trust managed by his sister. When Kouri realized after his death that she had been completely cut out of the fortune she killed for, she launched a fierce civil lawsuit against Eric's family, demanding access to the millions. The prosecution argued that this unmitigated greed was the definitive proof of her motive. Kouri's defense team, led by a powerhouse array of defense lawyers, launched a scorched-earth strategy to inject reasonable doubt into the minds of the jury. They attacked the credibility of the state's star witness, CL, pointing out their extensive history of substance abuse and legal trouble. They argued that there was zero physical evidence directly tying Kouri to the actual administration of the drug. No one saw her put pills in the drink. No chemical residue of fentanyl was ever recovered from the kitchen copper mugs, which had been washed before police arrived. The defense tried to argue a deeply controversial alternative theory, that Eric Richins had been secretly self-medicating with street-level painkillers to deal with the intense physical toll of his masonry work, and that his death was a tragic, accidental self-overdose. But as the trial entered its final days in mid-March 2026, the state unleashed a piece of breakthrough behavioral data that shattered the defense's alternate theory completely. They brought forward a forensic analysis of Kouri's search history from the hours immediately following Eric's death. While her husband's body was still at the morgue, Kouri wasn't searching for grief counseling or funeral homes. She was searching for what happens to a life insurance payout if the cause of death is pending, and can an autopsy detect luxury pills? The jury was left to look at a woman who had meticulously calculated the precise cash value of her husband's life, using her own children as characters in a public relations campaign to mask an execution. On March 16, 2026, the long, dark journey for the family of Kouri Richins finally reached its absolute destination. After weeks of grueling testimony, the jury walked back into the silent, packed courtroom. The air was heavy, thick with years of accumulated trauma and the broken pieces of a fractured family structure. The four persons stood up, adjusted their glasses, and read the unanimous verdict into the microphone. Guilty on all 5 counts, including first-degree aggravated murder. Kouri Richins sat completely motionless at the defense table, her face a mask of absolute, icy stillness as the reality of a permanent future behind concrete walls settled over her. The carefully crafted illusion of the resilient, grieving children's author was permanently stripped away, replaced by the definitive legal designation of a convicted murderer. Science, digital forensics, and the absolute courage of Eric's surviving family members had done what they always do when properly weaponized. They exposed the absolute truth. The motive was as hollow as time itself. Pure, unadulterated financial greed mixed with a complete absence of human empathy. Kouri had chosen to poison the man who built a beautiful life for her, simply to protect a House of Cards business empire and live a life of unearned luxury. The true tragedy of this case doesn't reside in the courtroom records or the legal briefs. It lives in the quiet, empty spaces left behind in the lives of 3 young boys who have to grow up with the staggering, heavy knowledge that their father was taken from them. And the woman who wrote a book to help them heal from that loss was the very one who caused it. We look at true crime stories to try and understand the outer limits of human deception. The Richins case stands as a chilling, monumental warning about the dangers of extreme psychological narcissism. It reminds us that sometimes the most calculating predators don't look like monsters hiding in dark alleys. Sometimes they sit right next to you in bed, smiling as they hand you a drink, completely prepared to turn your family's worst nightmare into a New York Times bestseller. And as the heavy steel prison doors close permanently behind Kouri Richins, the beautiful mountain valleys of Summit County can finally breathe a long-awaited, somber sigh of relief. Eric's memory has been pulled completely out of the dark, calculated static of her lies, and placed into the permanent, unyielding light of absolute justice.